From the time I was in the 5th grade all the way up through high school, that's all I dreamed about was going into the Navy. My dad was in the Navy, my foster dad, and he had this book of Navy ships that I looked at all the time and studied them and wanted to be on one of them. So that was my dream, to go into the Navy. Well, I got a little angry with the folks at home. I had about 3 months to go of school yet, and I decided to quit high school and join the Navy. When my mom found out I signed up early to quit school, she went through the roof. And my dad, my mom and dad did not want me, well, they didn't want me to go in the first place, but to quit school and go, they had a fit. So I went up to the Navy recruiter and I talked to him. And when he found out I was taking vocational electric shop, he said if I finished high school, he could guarantee me a good school in the Navy, but I'd have to have my high school diploma. Plus, it was during the Korean War and there was a 3-month waiting period to get in. So he said, if you just finish school, it'll work out. So we set it up. My graduation was July the 3rd, and I was to leave for my physical on July the 7th. So July 7th, I went to Pittsburgh for my physical, and my mom kept saying, you'll never pass the physical, you'll be back. And I remember calling her and telling her I passed the physical, ha ha ha, and she went through the roof again. But I went from there to Bainbridge, Maryland, and had 13 weeks of basic training. And they came down for the graduation service. And then I went home I had a 2-week leave and I went home. I went to school from there, Washington, D.C., 56 weeks. I was in Washington, D.C. in Fire Control Tech School. The longest school the Navy had at that time. Now they got guided missileman school and that's a lot longer. Electrician school was like 13 weeks and fire control school was 56 because we had to learn hydraulics, we had to learn mechanics, and we had to learn electronics. So, because everything was hydraulic and electronically operated. And it was a good school. I liked the school. And I liked the time in D.C. too, because I really enjoyed myself there. As a matter of fact, every weekend that I had liberty, I hitchhiked home. And I'd hitchhike home on Friday night and hitchhike back on Sunday from Canton to Washington, D.C., even in the wintertime. And there were some bad times standing out on that Pennsylvania Turnpike and that wind blowing. But usually we got, if nothing else, a car wouldn't stop and pick us up. A semi-driver would almost every time. They weren't allowed, but they saw us and they'd pick us up. So I never had much trouble getting a ride then. And it wasn't dangerous like it is today. After fire control school, I had 30 days leave. And from there, I went to New York City. And I remember taking a train from Canton to New York, getting off at the Grand Central Station in New York, catching a cab to the Brooklyn Navy Yard where I was supposed to check in. And it cost me like 36 bucks. And I thought, boy, this town is expensive. Well, when I got to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, I ran into a guy that I went through boot camp with who had been there for a while. And he said, let's go downtown to New York. And I said, not for 36 bucks. He said, no, we'll take the subway. Put me off from the Brooklyn Navy Yard at the Grand Central Station for 15 cents. And I was furious. If I'd have known it going in, of course, I'd have saved myself a lot of money. But I was there waiting for 2 weeks for my ship, and they decided it was going to come in Norfolk instead. So they sent me to Norfolk, and I sat there in a room from about noon till midnight till my ship finally pulled in and I went aboard ship. And we went from there to Newport Navy Yard, right across the river, where we sat for another month while they refitted the ship. From there we went to Puerto Rico for our, what they call a shakedown cruise, to make sure everything was working on the ship. And from there we went to Barcelona, where I spent the remainder of my Navy days in Barcelona, Spain. We did come back for about 30 days to do some stuff with our tanks that were leaking. I was on a white tanker, carried aviation gasoline, but we come back to the Brooklyn Navy Yard where they fixed the tanks, and then if you had less than 3 months, you didn't have to go back over unless you wanted to. Well, I wanted to. I had just 3 months to go, and I wanted to go back over because shore duty was just dragging and sea duty was great. So I signed to go back over, and they took me back over. And I enjoyed those days at sea duty. They were absolutely fabulous. And I wouldn't trade it for all the tea in China. It was a great, great learning experience. As a fire control technician, I was in charge of the radar and the computer systems that operated the guns. They couldn't fire the guns till we had the computers lined up on the target. And then we had to pull the trigger on the computers while they had the trigger pulled on the gun. Triggers, they're not really triggers, but the firing pins. Well, I had almost a hearing loss complete in my right ear, and I lost it completely while I was in the Navy, and then my left ear's just happened over the years, but I still think it was from we had that 5-inch on the fantail of our ship. And when that thing went off, I mean, it blew pots and pans in the galley, off the walls and everything else. It made one hell of a noise. And we didn't wear earplugs, which was, you know, crazy not to wear earplugs. Even the 3-inch were loud, but nothing like that 5-inch was. And the 40 millimeters were loud, but they were more of a sharp ack type firing, rapid fire, where the 3-inch and the 5-inch was one shell at a time. Being on a white tanker, of course, it was susceptible to explosions with the slightest thing. And we went alongside other ships and fueled them while we're steaming along at pretty good speeds. And we had a new skipper, and we're on our way to Naples for me to get my plane to come back for my discharge, and we decided we had to fuel a ship. So we pulled alongside of it, and this new skipper didn't know what he was doing, and he went in too fast, and we sideswiped it, and I thought, this thing's going to blow up just as I'm ready to get off after all this time. But fortunately it didn't blow up, thanks to the damage controlman, who watered down the sides real fast and kept the sparks down. But anyway, it tore a hole in the side of the ship, and so we went on into Naples, and I caught a plane back to Norfolk for discharge, and they had to put the ship in the dry dock and fix it. I got back to Norfolk, and I went in on July 7th of 1953 and got out in July of 57. And I remember the guy telling me when he was handing me my papers and my travel expense money, he said, now, you're getting out 4 days early, so you owe us 4 days. And I said, that's fine. If you want me, you'll have to burn the state and sift the ashes to find me. He didn't like that very well, but they couldn't very well court-martial me at that point because I was a civilian.